Hello, my name is Thomas Jumper, and for this assignment, I chose Shakespeare in the Bush by Laura Bohannon. What I really liked about this article is that it seems like a simple story at first, just someone telling a story, but it ends up revealing something much deeper about culture and worldview. So I'll summarize first the article, and then I'll talk about how it connects to worldview and intercultural communication. So to start off, the article is Bohannon staying with the Tiv people in West Africa, and she decides to tell them the story of Hamlet. She believes Shakespeare's themes are universal and that themes like betrayal, grief, revenge, can all be assumed by the Tiv, and they will understand it the same way she does. But kind of the opposite happens. As she tells the story, the Tiv elders interrupt and reinterpret almost everything that she says. They don't believe the ghost is really Hamlet's father because, in their culture and their worldview, the dead don't return that way. They also think it's completely normal for Hamlet's mother to marry her husband's brother. A big point that most people in the original culture would have assumed that is, something that's not in the norm in English culture. Instead, they question Hamlet's behaviors and decisions. So the main idea of the article is that meaning isn't universal, it's shaped by culture. And that's shown with how the elders reinterpret most of the themes of Hamlet and the story itself. And that leads directly into how worldview affects interpretation. What really stands out is the Tiv weren't confused. They were misunderstanding the story. They were interpreting it through their own cultural framework. Bohannon assumed there was one correct meaning to Hamlet, but the Tiv confidently explained their own version of events that made complete sense in their culture. It shows that we all filter information through what we've grown up believing, our norms, traditions, and assumptions, which make up our worldview and acts as a lens. And most of the time, we don't realize we're looking through one. And honestly, that's where ethnocentrism shows up. One ethnocentric bias in this article, Bohannon's belief that Western literature represents universal human truth. As we see in the story, that it's proven that it's not true. She truly believes Shakespeare proved that people everywhere think the same way. That assumption came from her own Western education and background. She didn't initially consider that another culture might have a completely different way of understanding family structure, the supernatural, or mortality. That's the lens she was seeing through. At first, she says their interpretations are incorrect, but over time, she starts to realize that her interpretation isn't neutral, it's cultural too. And that realization challenges something a lot of us assume without thinking about. This story challenges the idea that our cultural values are normal or best. For example, in American culture, marrying for love is seen as ideal. We value individual choice in relationships. But in the Tiv culture, marriage practices are used to tie family responsibility and tradition. From their perspective, Hamlet's emotional reactions seem immature or irrational, specifically with the issue of Hamlet's uncle marrying his father's widow. As the Tiv people explain, this would be normal. It's the responsibility of one's brother after their passing to marry their wife and take on their children. It's the importance of family in their culture is much different, and the roles are able to be replaced, which I personally thought was very beautiful in a way. That this sense of togetherness and closeness where we can interject or take on each other's roles and make sure each other's families are taken care of even after we're gone. I think that's something that American culture as well has a good meaning for, but maybe not in the sense of your brother marrying your uncle, marrying your mother, sorry, after your father passes. It really forces us to ask, is our way normal or is it just familiar? And when we think about our own culture, the question becomes even more real. In American culture, dating before marriage and prioritizing personal happiness is common. We see that as freedom and independence. But someone from a culture that emphasizes arranged marriages or strong family involvement might see that differently. They might view American dating culture as unstable or overly focused on individual desire. It all depends on worldview. So, what does this mean for intercultural communication? One of the best practices we can take from this article is cultural humility. Instead of assuming we're right, we should approach conversations with curiosity. In the article, Bohannon initially tries to defend her interpretation, but eventually she listens. The shift from defending to listening is key. I think that was about the time where she was trying to explain how um, the difference with like the ghosts and the witches and only males of the family being able to bewitch other females members of the family, like with Lartris and his sister's death, which was very interesting take on Hamlet. So that shift from defending to listening is key. Asking questions, seeking clarification, and recognizing that our interpretation isn't the only valid one that can prevent misunderstandings. I've actually seen something happen similar in real life. I once saw someone assume that avoiding eye contact meant dishonesty, but in some cultures, avoiding eye contact is only a sign of respect, especially towards authoritative figures. When I grew up in Lewiston, Maine, I was in a community with a lot of Somalian refugees and other African refugees from the Congo, and many of them had much different cultural representations as far as how they treated elders. And it was something that my parents always loved that I played soccer, because there's a lot of those refugees and people of that culture on our team, and they always loved how at every game or after practices they would come over and say hello to my parents and ask them how they're doing, and show a lot of respect towards all the elders in the community as well. So that was something that I got to witness growing up. That situation reminds me of this article because in both cases, with the avoiding eye contact, people weren't wrong. They were operating from different cultural assumptions. The misunderstanding came from assuming one interpretation was universal. The biggest lesson I took from this article is that worldview shapes everything. Even when we think we're being objective, we all interpret situations through cultural lenses, and if we want to communicate effectively across cultures, we have to recognize those lenses and our own biases, but our own and other people's as well. As Laura did in her article, she had to kind of try to break down the intercultural barrier, like with trying to explain what a ghost was to the Tiv tribe. This article really reinforced that awareness and openness aren't optional in intercultural communication. They're essential. So this was a really interesting article to read, and that is my take on it. Thank you for listening.